welcome back to Global Environment. On the previous segments, we really saw clearly how important fuel is for our way of life, for our economy, for our wealth, specifically fossil fuels and even more specifically oil. So let's see where we stand in the United States, lately when it comes to fuel. Okay, so this shows, it's getting a little bit old, but it basically holds for what we see today. This shows energy use in the U.S. And what do you see? Our total consumption is now over 100 quads. Right here it says 94, but it's now over 100 quads of energy. And that is 100 quadrillion BTUs. And that doesn't mean a lot to you, but let me give you something to compare it with. If we took all the plants in America, all the front lawns, all the trees, all the bushes, all the agriculture, and quantified how much energy those plants capture every year, that would be about 30 quads. Our economy every year uses about 3 times as much energy as all the plants in America. So keep that in mind when we think about solutions. Okay, so we're using tons of energy, and it's roughly divided between residential, commercial, industrial, and transportation. And you can see a lot of this is fossil fuels, and more imported fossil fuels. So we really require fossil fuels to keep this show on the road, basically. Now, if we're worried about oil, and we're worried about oil running out, we have to make predictions to see really how long will that last. That's not easy to do, because one of the things we have to know is how much oil there really is. So since oil is one of our most important fuels, let's look at that. Let's look at some estimates of how much we might have in the ground. And you can see over time, various estimates. It grew for a while, and then it kind of stayed close to 2 trillion barrels of oil. Now, most people believe these last statistics by the USGS are the most accurate. They have a high value, a low value, and then kind of their most confident value, which is about 3 trillion barrels of oil. And a lot of people use this now. Now, one thing to remember when it comes to oil is that we're never going to run out of oil. What we're going to run out of is oil that's worth getting, and we'll talk about that later. It has to do with energy return on investment. Now, back to this idea that we might have 3 trillion barrels of oil. That's pretty fuzzy. It's hard to know this. Why is it? Well, basically, we have to count on countries that aren't always friendly to us to self-report their oil reserves. Okay? Now, look at this. This shows a number of OPEC countries and how much oil they say they have per year. Now, do you notice anything peculiar? Basically, in 1987, we see a huge jump in the amount of reported reserves. Now, why is that? Did these countries come up with some new technology that helped them find more oil? Or was it something else? Was it something related to policy? Well, at the same time in 1987, OPEC changed their policies on how fast their members could pump oil. If a country had more oil in the ground, they could pump oil faster and make more money. So they could pump at a rate that was proportional to what they had in the ground. And overnight, all these countries said they had more oil. Now you have to ask yourself, how much of this jump is real? It's almost 40%. How much of this is real and how much of this is ghost oil? And a few years ago, there were some memos leaked out of the Kuwaiti oil department, basically, oil ministry, that was saying that basically half of their reported oil was ghost oil. Okay, so we might not have as much oil as we think we have. Now let's look at this. Say 3 trillion barrels of oil is correct. Is it useful to think of a situation where we're going to use oil, we're going to use it, and it's going to just run out? Or is there a better way to look at it? Well, here's a guy, M. King Hubbert, Dr. Hubbert. He could be America's greatest scientist, and most people have probably never heard of this guy. But he was a petroleum geologist, and he studied oil wells for many, many years, and he developed a method that explained the extraction of oil from oil wells and even entire regions and nations. And it's interesting because it works basically for any non-renewable resource. And what he saw is that over time, the extraction of a non-renewable resource would start out very slowly, and then it would climb, our technology would get better and better, and then it would start to peter out and then decline again. And he saw it again and again. And, you know, in case you want to know, in real life does this play out, this is anthracite coal, the best coal in America. Now we have some of this left, but we've blown through most of it. You can see how much we've produced over time. And this fits very well to a Hubbert curve, so it works for anthracite coal. Now, in 1956, Dr. Hubbert had a very famous talk that he gave to a number of petroleum people and also government people. And people wanted to know, what will happen to U.S. oil? Will production peak as we see it in the Hubbert curve? So in 1956, he had this data. And he went to this talk and he said, using my methods, I believe that U.S. oil will peak. The production of it will peak between 1966 and 1971. And they laughed at the guy. They said, there's no way. Our technology is becoming more and more advanced. It's never going to peak. Well, time went on, and it turned out that the peak was in 1970, right within the years he said it would peak. So he was right on. We got a little blip from Alaska, and now it's continued to go down ever since. And that's amazing. Most people don't know that peak production in the U.S. for oil was in 1970. And now we're at less than 50% production of 1970. And you can see that tracks really well with a Hubbert curve. Now, what's going on? Are we using less oil? Absolutely not. We're using more and more every year, and we're drawing it from sources outside the U.S. And this map here really shows these flows of energy that are powering our economy, our way of life. You can see a lot of it comes from the Middle East, but increasingly from Africa. We get some from South America, like Venezuela, Mexico, Canada. You know, you talk about the huge sucking sound. This is all required to keep our way of life going. Now, you know, what's going to happen when it comes to world oil? Might that peak? Well, let's look at this. This is kind of a neo-Hubbert graph for world oil here. And you can see it rising, and we actually saved some oil when our economy went bust in the 80s. And then this actually says that we would oil would peak worldwide in 2004, several years ago. Now this is kind of interesting. I've been showing this graph probably since 2000. And in 2000, the cost per barrel was about $20. So this looked far away still. And I would talk to people and I'd say, well, what if this is 10 years off? What if this is 20 years off? You know, how many of you are going to be around in 10 or 20 years? Now, if you look at the price per barrel today, and now I'm talking in 2008, you might think that this might be pretty accurate. Okay, now, you remember that graph I showed you that showed fuel energy use and the economy going up and down together? Again, your way of life and energy. What will our way of life be as we go down this side of the curve? That's something we should ask ourselves. Okay, and in case you're not completely convinced about peak oil yet, that it could happen, look at this. This shows a stack graph of world oil production, and in this graph you see the names of countries here, and then numbers next to these countries. These are the years that these countries' oils peaked and started to decline already. And as I talk here, 33 of the largest 45 oil-producing countries have already met peak and are in decline. Okay, so what's the big picture? What's the big picture? This is called Hubbert's pimple. And Hubbert's pimple includes all the fossil fuels, all the oil, all the gas, all the coal. And as you can see, in history, this is a once-in-a-lifetime, once-in-a-history occurrence, all of these exceptional fuels being found and utilized. And if we look back in time, We can go 5,000 years before we hit fossil fuels, and you look here, Stonehenge was built. We got really excited because we piled up some more stones. We piled up some stones. Then, 2,000 years later, we figured out how to use iron. We piled up some more stones. That was very exciting. And then we had fossil fuels. And think of all the things that have happened since. All the cities we've built, all the technologies we've built and been able to power with fossil fuels, our way of life. Incredible. We've sent people to the moon. We could build the pyramids in a week now if we wanted to. But once we're past this peak, what will we see on the other side? Will we be in a situation again where we get excited when we can pile up some rocks? That's what we have to think about. Okay, so we're going to stop there, and we're going to talk more about fuels, and we're going to bring in the concept of energy return on investment. Because it doesn't matter how much we have in the ground, if it's not worth getting because of the energetics involved, it's all over. So I'll see you next time on Global Environment.